thank you all very much for joining us today for the launch of our report on small arms proliferation and control measures in Ukraine. This really is actually a milestone moment for all of our team, so we are thrilled to have you among us. We have excellent participation from this webinar with representatives from diverse fields, from the diplomatic community, the security sectors, international organization, university, NGO. So I really hope that you each find something relevant for your work today. So my name is Aline Chaban, and I have had the privilege of coordinating the research activities for this project with my colleague Nicolas Florquin. The report that you are about to hear today really is the result of a very strong collaboration with the Center for Security Studies based in Kyiv and many external experts from Ukraine and beyond. So most importantly, this report is the culmination of 2.5 years of in-depth research. So really it is an honor for me to moderate today's discussion as we share the findings with you. So to begin the session, we're going to hear some opening remarks, starting with the German Federal Foreign Office, whose financial support made this work possible. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Borger, the Deputy Head of the Conventional and Arms Control Division. Please, Ms. Borger, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you also for allowing me to say a few welcoming words for the launch of today's report. The report is, excuse me, I opened the wrong file. The Proliferation and Control of Arms and Ammunition in Wartime Ukraine report, published by Small Arms Survey and the Center for Security Studies, is of course quite the highlight for us as well. You mentioned it, 2.5 years of work of this project. As many of you know, Germany places very high priority on small arms and light weapons control and ammunition management. Germany is one of the largest bilateral donors in firearm projects worldwide, with a combined volume of up to 20 million euros annually. We're very grateful to Ukrainian authorities and stakeholders for addressing firearms control and proliferation risks, particularly given the context of limited capacities and continued war fighting as a result of Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Germany is committed to continued support of Ukraine, including for firearm control efforts. Germany supports Ukrainian small arms control capacity building efforts bilaterally, as well as through cooperation with international organizations and civil society organizations. Germany is interested in continuing these partnerships. Small Arms Survey is one of our key implementing partners for firearms projects worldwide, including in Ukraine. We are grateful for their systematic research and long-standing expertise, great network, and local partnerships. Regarding this particular SAS project and study, I would like to highlight, first of all, the strong local network enabling nationwide assessments and public surveys, and second, the comprehensive collections of publicly available data, systematic analysis, as well as valuable trend analysis. The project has generated timely and empirical research and helped building capacities among a network of local experts. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the study and the results, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Berger, for your kind words, and your continued support has really been essential throughout this project. I will now turn to Alexander Panchenko from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Alexander is the Small Arms and Light Weapon Program Manager in Ukraine for OSCE and has been actually following our work from the very beginning as one of our valued members of the Advisory Committee project. So please, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you, first of all, for invitation. So, dear esteemed participants of webinar, dear colleagues, first of all, it's my honor to co-open today's webinar organized by Small Arms Survey together with CENSS, which brings together Ukrainian Authority and key international partners with a shared objective to further reduce the risk of illicit flow of weapons and ammunition to, within and from Ukraine, in the context of Russia's ongoing war of aggression. For 4 years, security and defense institutions have been simultaneously repelling full-scale military aggression and confronting criminal threats, including the illicit trafficking of firearms, ammunition, and explosives. It is broadly recognized that armed conflict significantly heightens the risk of weapons proliferation. During the war, access to the firearms increases and incidents involving small arms and light weapons in civilian settings receive growing attention, highlighting the needs of robust, well-coordinated and mitigation measures. Ukraine faces a particularly complex self-control environment with both national and international, transnational, I would say, dimensions. This complexity underscores the critical importance of coordinated and evidence-based actions at all levels. As you know, since 2023, 15 international organizations and the EU agency have been working jointly with Ukrainian authorities to strengthen national self-control across a wide spectrum of thematic areas. These collective efforts reflect our shared commitment to enhancing the effectiveness, transparency, and resilience of weapons and ammunition control system in Ukraine. Within this broader framework, the Small Arms Race jointly with CENSS, as a long-standing and active participant in a matrix of international partners, has undertaken an independent analytical study on weapons proliferation challenges in wartime Ukraine. Just allow me to emphasize the value of such independent research. Combined with official government data and analysis, the Small Arms Race finding helped to build a clear and more comprehensive picture of weapons proliferation dynamics. This evidence base is essential for developing targeted policy response, designing effective preventing and counter-trafficking measures, and mobilizing international resources to reinforce the capacity of Ukraine law enforcement and security agency. Just a practical example, allow me to outline how our cooperation will proceed in practical terms. These findings of the study, Weapons Compass, Proliferation and Control of Arms and Ammunition in Wartime Ukraine, will be used by OEC in close partnership with the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine to inform the preparation of next year nationwide public opinion survey and communication campaign. These activities constitute an important preventive instrument aimed at reducing the illicit circulation of nation. So I wish all of us productive discussion today. According to agenda, this webinar will address a range of issues central to our common efforts to mitigate the risk of illicit weapons and ammunition flow. Your expertise, your engagement are vital to advancing this shared objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for sharing a few words. It truly has been a pleasure cooperating with you this past year, and we all look forward for further cooperation. So now but not least, our very own director of the Small Arms Survey, Dr. Mark Downs, will close this introduction session with some last words.
Thank you very much, Eileen, and good afternoon to everybody. And thank you for joining us today. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to our partner CENSS and to all of the authors who've contributed their time and their expertise and commitment to this work. We're truly grateful for your continued engagement. Eileen has already outlined the broader context of the project, so I'll not repeat that here. Instead, I want to briefly situate today's report within the longer arc of our engagement in Ukraine, which began back in around 2017. And from the very beginning, one of our central aims was to ensure that both Ukrainian policymakers and their international partners have access to reliable, evidence-based data to guide their interventions. Effective policy cannot be built on assumptions. It has to be grounded in facts. And in a context where disinformation remains a constant threat, the need for credible, verifiable data becomes even more urgent. As you'll hear today, this is precisely why this report matters. Over the years, we've benefited enormously from the transparency of the Ukrainian government, its security agencies and institutions, as well as the dedication of our Ukrainian networking group. These are professionals who are deeply committed to helping Ukraine address the challenges posed by the illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Today's report is one of the tangible outputs of this collaboration. Its strength lies in its mixed methods approach, combining both quantitative seizure data with insights from practitioners from the field. And the result is a body of evidence that is solid, that's credible, and crucially, it's actionable by our Ukrainian partners. The immediate priority for Ukraine and for all of us supporting it remains clear, ensuring that the country has the assistance it needs to defend itself against the ongoing Russian aggression. But even as this remains essential, we must also prepare for the next phase of the conflict, a phase that will unfold not on the battlefield, but within the fabric of Ukraine's democratic institutions. As Russia cannot achieve an outright military victory, its objective is instead the long-term destabilization of Ukraine's political and social order. The presence of tens of thousands of small arms and light weapons, which have been looted, trafficked, or lost in the chaos of war, now circulate within Ukraine. This influx of illicit weaponry threatens public security, it empowers criminal networks, and it erodes trust in state institutions. If left unaddressed, it risks fueling instability long after the frontline battles end. Our analysis of the seizure data shows a concerning trend. Illicit trafficking is growing both in scale and diversification. These weapons fuel violent and organized crime, they complicate reconstruction, and they hinder effective governance. Let's make it clear. Unchecked proliferation can undermine recovery for decades. Supporting Ukraine, therefore, means more than providing ammunition or intelligence. It means helping the Ukrainian government strengthen its armed control mechanisms, secure and manage stockpiles to prevent diversion, and develop the law enforcement and judicial capacity needed to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle trafficking networks. This is not a question of choosing one priority over another. Defending Ukraine today and building resilience for tomorrow must go hand in hand. And that's why today's discussion and the evidence presented in this report is so important. I look forward to hearing from our panel and continuing this vital work with many of you. Thanks, Eileen. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I hope these opening remarks sheds a bit of light on the context in which this report was produced. Now, I just want to outline really quickly the plan for this session. This webinar is actually structured in two main parts. So the first session will be a series of 3 presentations that delves into the more substantive matter, so issues related directly to the arms dynamic, the management of trophy weapons, and public perceptions of firearms proliferations. These 3 presentations actually represent the 3 first chapter of the report. And after this presentation, we will move on to the second part of the webinar, which is aimed to be a little bit more forward-looking with the focus on policy implication. And here we have the pleasure to have some practitioners from Ukraine who will discuss some of the findings with us and share some of their impressions. Just one word about housekeeping matters. I would like to encourage you all to submit your questions through the Q&A box throughout the duration of the webinar. We might not, of course, be able to respond to each of them, but we also encourage you to reach out to us bilaterally if you have any questions or comments regarding the report or some of the things that have been said today. Last but not least, as you know, Ukraine is facing regular electricity cuts, so we hope it won't affect too much our colleagues who are in Ukraine at the moment, but it is a possibility, in which case we ask for a little bit of patience. They might require them a few minutes to reconnect, so please keep that in mind. And with that, I think we shall begin. So I would like to introduce my dear colleague, Matt Schroeder. Matt is a senior researcher at the Small Arms Survey, where he studies the illicit proliferation of small arms and strategies for mitigating the threat. He has worked on different regions, focusing always on the illicit trafficking of proliferation. He's done a lot of research, notably in Afghanistan, in Europe, the Caribbean, and his expertise is very much also around weapon identification. Please, Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eileen. I'll just, there we go. All right, so next slide, please. One more slide. So thanks. What I thought I'd do today is just provide a brief overview of our research goals, talk a bit about one of the key motivations for undertaking the research for this chapter, and then briefly summarize some of our key findings. So I'll start with the research goals. First one, determine whether and how illicit arms flows and inventories in Ukraine have changed since the full-scale invasion, and the massive influx of small arms, light weapons, and ammunition, both deployed with the Russians and also exported to Ukraine in response to the invasion. And then secondly, assess the claims of widespread high-level diversion of arms and ammunition from Ukrainian military stocks. Next slide, please. And so the motivation for both goals, but particularly the second one, stems from our observation of a constant deluge of claims about, not just about diversion, but about high-level diversion resulting from corruption and subsequent international trafficking of some of the most sensitive weapons that the Europeans provided to Ukraine. Some of these claims, and a lot of them originating either with the Russian government or with Russia's proxies on media and social media. Some of these claims are pretty easy to refute, such as the quote-unquote Ukrainian Javelin that was spotted in Mexico, which was actually an AT-4, a weapon that's been circulating in Latin America for decades. Others, not so easy, not because they're less dubious, but because there wasn't the data and analysis required to kind of systematically assess and refute them. So that's in part our motivation behind undertaking this research. Next slide. So now I'm just going to summarize very briefly some of our key findings. Obviously, there's more details in the report. What we found, looking at from like a 15,000-foot view, is that there has been a significant increase in seizures of light weapons and light weapons ammunition in the 3 years since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Not only in absolute terms, in terms of quantities, but also relative to seizures of other types of weapons, including weapons that were more frequently seized prior to the full-scale invasion, most of which were kind of civilian in nature. Not surprising, given the massive increase in these types of weapons that are deployed in Ukraine, but worrisome because of the nature of these weapons. Next slide. So we also looked at the makes and models of the weapons that are seized, and to the extent that the seizures are representative of illicit, the broader population of illicit weapons, those weapons that are currently circulating in Ukraine. And we look specifically at Western weapons and Russian weapons. I can't get into the Russian weapons because of time constraints, but that's summarized in the report. But here is a brief summary of our findings on Western weapons. And what we mean by Western weapons are weapons that were manufactured and exported to Ukraine by EU and NATO and other European countries that we had not seen outside of government control in illicit inventories prior to the full-scale invasion. So this would be, so any occurrences of these weapons outside of government control in the seizures, that would be new proliferation. And what we found was that recently imported Western weapons have proliferated widely, but only in small numbers. And this box contains some of the data that we generated as a result of our research. And so the number of oblasts in which we've identified these weapons, and I'm speaking specifically about grenades. We looked at grenades and shoulder-fired rockets. So 23 of the 24 oblasts, we identified Western models. And I guarantee you they're also in the 24th oblast, but there were some data shortages that affected that. but in relatively small quantities. So of the 4,129 grenades that we identified in photos of seized weapons by model, only 11% were Western weapons. So the vast majority are still what we call legacy weapons. These are makes and models, primarily Soviet era items that have been circulating in Ukraine since at least 2014. Another important data point is seizures of 10 or more grenades of the same model. So this is the type of seizure that one might expect if there is a lot of weapons going out the back door to enrich a corrupt kernel. The kind of diversion that the Russians claim is happening in Ukraine. We saw very little evidence of this. Of the 1,177 seizures we studied, only 48 included 10 seizures of 10 or more grenades of the same model. And of those 48, only 2 contained 10 or more grenades of the same model that were Western models. So in short, in regards to grenades and shoulder-fired rockets, are 2 proxy categories. We haven't seen any evidence of systematic, high-level diversion claimed by the Russians. Next slide. We also looked at portable missiles, both because these are some of the most sensitive items in Ukraine outside of government control, and because they were the focus of a lot of the mis and disinformation. And what we found is largely similar to what we found with the other categories. We found in the table on the left-hand side, those are all of the incidents of seizures of portable missiles, so man-portable air defense systems, anti-tank guided missiles that we identified in the seizure summaries. And as you can see, there aren't that many. And if you look at the details, most of them were small seizures. So just 1 or 2 items, usually missiles, very rarely complete systems. And also 9 of the 10 were of legacy systems. Same Soviet design systems that we'd seen outside of Ukraine since well before 2022, the one exception being a single next generation light anti-tank weapon, NLAW, that was seized from traffickers in 2024. Because of the importance of this particular set of weapons, we also attempted to corroborate this data or check this data by looking at data which is very detailed in documentation generated as a result of prosecutions of weapons-related offenses in Ukraine. So we refer to these as just shorthand for court cases. And of the 20 cases we identified that involved portable missiles, so it would be illicit transfer, illicit possession, or illicit transport, 18 were of small quantities. Again, similar to the ones in the table, 5 or fewer components. And then also very few Western systems, only 5 cases, 4 of which consisted of a single anti-tank guided missile. And then finally, almost all of them, 18 of the 20 were domestic. The 2 international cases involving intended international transfers of portable missiles involved legacy systems. So no evidence to support the claims of shiploads of Stingers and Javelins being either diverted within Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. Next slide. What we did find, however, is that there is a very significant proliferation problem within Ukraine, and less of the portable missiles and more of just the more mundane but equally lethal types of items that are just a regular part of warfare. So, and so one of our conclusions, I think is very important, is that the most affected population are Ukrainians. And this seems self-evident, but you wouldn't guess it based on international media coverage, which tends to focus on the potential of significant international trafficking or the mis and disinformation spouted by the Russians. But it is the Ukrainians who are suffering from this problem, and it is the Ukrainians that will continue to suffer for the foreseeable future. And just to give you an example of how widespread this proliferation is, we use grenades in the report, and they're found by civilians in every conceivable location. And there's a list of just a few examples from the 2-year period that we studied in the box below. Some of these are reported to authorities and they're disposed of properly, but others are taken home. They're put in sheds, they're put in garages, they're put in kitchen cabinets. And this poses an immediate threat to the family members, both from accidental explosion, but also from deliberate use, but not just family members, but also first responders, neighbors, and the community at large. There are cases of grenades being used in road rage incidents, in attempted robberies, and even in suicides. So it's a huge problem, and it requires sustained attention, not just immediately, but for the foreseeable future. So I'll stop there and turn the floor back over to Elaine.
Thank you very much, Matt, for these insights. So I would like now to turn to Dr. Taras Fedirko. Taras is a political and economic anthropologist studying how social movements organize to transform war economies, political institutions, and capitalist value and value labor regime. He's also a lecturer at the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Glasgow and a senior research fellow at the Institute for Human Science in Vienna. Please, Taras.
Thank you, Aline. Good afternoon or good evening, colleagues. And it's a particular pleasure to be here today to be presenting the results of our work. And I will talk about chapter 2, which I co-wrote with my colleague Marina Maleoniuk. She's a pseudonym in Ukraine. And this chapter is about trophy weapons. Next slide, please. As Matt has mentioned, one of the type of items that his chapter covered and that the report covers are Russian origin small arms and light weapons and ammunition. And this is really what we've been looking at when we were talking about trophy weapons. And one of the issues is that these weapons are captured and by Ukrainian troops and then proliferate on the front line and to a lesser extent in the rear. And there really is no other way or no better way to find out about this than to ask the people who are capturing these weapons. And this is what we did. We conducted 60 in-depth semi-structured interviews ranging between 1 and 3 hours with various people who would know about the capture and proliferation of these and circulation of these weapons. And that mainly means combatants and veterans, mostly at the sort of soldier level, but also some of the officer rank, military activists, members of families, civilians in frontline areas. Of those people, about half or 32 were with current or former military service people all across the defense forces. And of the 60 interviews, 51 mentioned some kind of weapons and ammunition, and 28 mention or reflect on the fact of presence of trophy weapons. And we studied that, we transcribed the interviews and we did an inductive thematic analysis, which was open to incorporating any evidence of or discussions of trophy weapons. Next slide, please. Before I tell you the upshot, and really the results are quite complex, but before I tell you the upshot of those results, I need to first spend some time disambiguating the terms. When we talk about trophy weapons or trofejna zbroja in Ukrainian, we really are not talking about any kinds of weapons which are found on the battlefield or in territories which have been abandoned by retreating Russian or Ukrainian troops. We are talking specifically, and according to Ukrainian secondary legislation, we're talking about weapons seized on the battlefield or in the context of post-combat operations from the troops of the aggressor state. And in Ukrainian context, it means Ukrainian military personnel seizing Russian military assets and Russian weapons. This is a definition that's set out in 2 decrees at the Cabinet of Ministers and at the ministerial level. And I have to emphasize that the trophy weapons are defined in secondary legislation. They aren't anywhere defined in primary legislation in Ukraine, which is quite significant, I think, from the legal point of view. And from that point of view, we are contrasting trophy weapons, which are weapons captured by military personnel, to found or scavenged weapons, or znайдена зброя, which are defined in primary legislation in Ukraine, which are weapons found by civilians. The law defines trophy weapons and trophy items as state property and obliges those who find them, the military, to enter them into efficient military inventory using a certain set of predefined procedures, at which point the military unit who registers them responsibility for these items, and at that point as any regular state issued military asset or military item. That's also important because what I'm going to talk about next is, in the next slide, please, is the ways in which troops do and do not register those weapons. So first thing to say is that Ukrainian troops that we've spoken with are all very well aware of official regulations that mandate the registration of trophy weapons. And more broadly, are very well aware of the broader set of regulations about the handling, storage, and management of military assets, and specifically small arms and light weapons. And they also, the testimony suggests that Ukrainian military and defense forces more broadly have put great efforts into inspecting the use and presence of captured weapons, and also to seize those that haven't been registered from units' frontline positions. And last thing I'll say on this slide is that Ukrainian troops are also aware of the harsh legal consequences for losing registered state-issued weapons, and which gets me to the next issue. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, just to give you a bit of a taster, the troops we talked a lot about trophy weapons of very different kinds, and also about the criminal liability that they believe might result from mishandling of officially registered weapons. Next slide. Right, and this is the crux of the matter. How are trophy weapons used, and why are they not registered? So our findings suggest that capture of weapons is routine on the front line. The first units to enter and control former Russian positions have the greatest access to trophy weapons. And trophy weapons usually remain with the unit of persons who captures them, and these people not always register them. They, however, routinely reuse the trophy weapons and ammunition. The people who find them, they reuse them in combat, and they use them to replenish their own sort of stockpiles, and sometimes they use them, if they have more of what they need, to redistribute within the unit, but also to distribute them to neighboring units on the neighboring stretch of front line. Sometimes they're bartered for other critical resources. This is one of the reasons why they avoid registering these trophy weapons. And we observe from the evidence partial compliance with the registration requirement, where some troops and units avoid registering captured weapons in order to be able to rely on them as a kind of critical resource that can be bartered, or as a substitute for state-issued arms for practical reasons. And the two main reasons that I wish I had more time to spend on, but I can't, is one, that they feel that they need to avoid red tape and potential penalties for losing or damaging registered arms. And that's why they try to rely on unregistered trophy weapons, which can be lost without consequence. And also they rely on these weapons in order to mitigate and flexibly mitigate shortages in official supplies, right? So they don't get enough of what they need, and so they try to use trophy weapons to replenish what they need. And if they avoid registering them, then they can keep it and it doesn't get redistributed across a broader unit. So next slide. Here's just quickly a quote to give you a sense of the range, the ability of items, just from one testimony where there's a soldier who talks about, an infantry veteran who talks about finding very different kinds of items near Bakhmut. Next slide, please. And these people, like the people I quoted, and other interviewees of ours, talk about their own reliance on trophy weapons. And the way in which they talk about it points that the reliance on unregistered weapons is a pragmatic adaptation to time constraints and bureaucratic pressures that formal military regulations and various kinds of shortages imposed on Ukrainian forces, which are already overburdened. And there seems to be a certain tolerance of this practice among those who find recourse to it, but also some tolerance of it among commanding officers who seem to recognize the practical benefits of this practice. Troops we interviewed claimed that the circulation of trophy weapons was limited to the front line. So they talk about good uses of trophy weapons, which are for combat. And this combines with very, very limited evidence that trophy weapons are being redirected to illicit markets, right? And I have to say that I have to emphasize this because contrary to the imagery of organized criminal units prowling the front lines to seize weapons and to direct them to illicit markets, we have a practical logic of combat troops trying to replenish their stockpiles with trophy weapons. However, the more unregistered trophy weapons there are, the greater the risk that the change in the course of the war could lead to greater diversion from the front lines. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taras. You touched on a very important topic, and the many in-depth interview you conducted surely contributed to a better understanding of the situation on the front line. The many quotes that you included in your chapter are also very precious to capture the complex dynamics, so I will encourage everybody to have a look at the report. So the third chapter of this report now addresses a very different angle of arms proliferation. It focuses on public perception of security. So this chapter was led by György Hideg, who's a survey specialist and methodology advisor. He's advised on a multitude of international clients and statistical issues, and he conducted multitude multi-country, policy-relevant quantitative social research, generally on topics such as living and working conditions, crime and victimization, well-being, and discrimination. Please, György, go ahead.
Thanks, Aline. Let me start by stating shortly that this chapter 3, that you introduced so eloquently, is not the product of my work, but it's mostly the product of the work of survey companies that we collaborated with in Ukraine, mostly Ipsos and KIS, the Kiev Institute, International Institute of Sociology, who have been conducting the field work, of which we have done 6 waves, which are included in the book in chapter 3, and the results of which I'm going to highlight some snapshots of, because there are a lot and we have very limited time. And the 7th wave is currently now it's done and is currently being analyzed. So the work is continuing. And let's delve into this with the next slide. Right. So this was the opportunity for us, and it was a weirdly exciting opportunity to have an opportunity for real-time observation of how firearms proliferate or penetrate a society during active conflict, which usually we have these active conflicts in places where there is no means to do reliable social research, but Ukraine was not like that. So we had the opportunity to track with our established methodologies to see how firearms penetrate or proliferate across society, and we expected an increase. And what we found instead, that we had this measurement, which is June 19, before the full-scale invasion, but after the initial stages of the war, when we found that 6% of the households in Ukraine said they had a firearm at home, which has a latency, which is an underestimation. But anyway, it was a figure which was established via our established methods or widely used methods of estimations. And we saw that this is going to increase after the full-scale invasion. And what we saw was the opposite. At the early stages, it seemed like the demand that Taras just mentioned, that the battle zone demands for firearms, the hunger of firearms and ammunition at the battle zones, kind of drawn weapons from households, and it has initially decreased the proportion of the households who had firearms at home, and ever since it has been fluctuating around between this 5 to 7% range. Which the last measurement is now a bit higher, 6.9%, but still broadly within this fairly moderate range, which is comparable to developed European countries' household level firearm penetration rates. So this is nothing extraordinary in that sense. We have used certain indirect and advanced methods for a more accurate or more reliable estimation of the actual proliferation, and this kind of tells us that in reality about 1 in 10 households in Ukraine does have a firearm right now, 1 or more firearms, which means that that is more or less what you would find in Germany or in Italy with the hunting weapon. So it is not too bad at this point. But if we go to the next slide, and what Taras has already hinted of is that when this war will enter a next stage with a cooling off, when there will be less acute demand for firearms at the front lines, everyone kind of assumes that these weapons who have left households during the initial stages will somehow, at least partly, find their way back to the civilians as well, not just to the criminal networks, but also households will be more equipped with firearms. And also there is this lingering feeling and information in Ukraine that people should be now more open for a more liberal regulation towards firearms, but this is not at all what we found in our surveys. We found the exact opposite. We found that citizens of Ukraine, or respondents at least, who have a representative sample of the citizens of Ukraine, prefer to have stricter regulations even compared to the current ones, and they would actually prefer to go back to the restrictive pre-war regime, which has been around since the Soviet times to regulate the civilian firearms scene in Ukraine. Especially women and non-combatants, people who did not participate in the war, continue to favor tight firearm regulations, which basically means that no civilians should be allowed to have firearms. On the other hand, veterans who have been participating in the war, which is a sizable number of individuals in Ukraine now, they have fundamentally different attitudes. They are far more likely to own and carry weapons even as a protection against crime. And by weapons, we don't only mean firearms, but they are also more likely than anybody else to carry firearms. And they support more permissive firearm laws. In fact, the majority of them are in favor of legalizing firearm possession for civilians in Ukraine. And that leads us to the next topic and slide that please switch, which is if we are anticipating an increased penetration or an increased level of household firearm ownership, then this comes with increased risks. Risks that Matt has mentioned, which are partly criminal, partly accidental, partly just misuse of firearms would be much more easier for a much larger part of the population. And how to mitigate this is, on one hand, is arms control, but on the other hand, acknowledging that this is this anticipated elevated possession rate among households is kind of inevitable. The raising of awareness of firearms risks and how to mitigate those would be very important as a public policy objective. Currently, as of now, a third of the Ukrainian population reports having some sort of firearms training. Most of them are men who received training in a formal setting through armed services, mostly military, or some of them from other security institutions. But there are people who said that they have received training informally or from their own learning through resources that they found. And we tested people's awareness of various security and safety measures. We found gaps. For example, 40% of Ukrainians can't recall any rule for handling a firearm. Not to point to anybody, always assume it's loaded, so not any of those. And only 24%, a quarter of those who have firearms at home, were able to confirm that they follow all 4 key rules of firearm storage, which means a safe locked location, which is almost universal, away from kids, which is also almost universal, but only a quarter said that they keep their weapons unloaded and separate from ammunition. And about 70% said that they use trigger locks or safety when they are storing firearms. So there are gaps in awareness, and those awareness campaigns that are to inform the remaining parts of the society about these risks do not seem to be very effectively reaching large proportions of the population. In this January wave, where you have the figures on the slide, 14% of all respondents have met an awareness or information campaign about firearm risks in general. Now, for the October wave, this decreased to 7%. So this is clearly a gap where we have things to do. And maybe this is how I hand you back, Aline.
Thank you very much, Gergely. Thank you all for your presentations. There is a lot more to say, and there is only so much we can cover in a 1.5-hour webinar. So the report was just made available online as we speak. So we invite you to download this report, to read it in your own time. It is available both in Ukrainian and in English. So before we move on to the policy-oriented section, actually, I would like to ask all of our presenters one question to you. So given our improved understanding of the dynamics surrounding arms proliferation in Ukraine now, because thanks to the data that you have each gathered, what do you believe are the most critical priority for policymakers right now to effectively mitigate proliferation risks? And I know that you have mentioned a few of them in the report, but for this webinar, I would like you to select one or two that you communicate to the audience. And I would like to start with you, Gergely, because the content you just presented is still very fresh in everyone's mind.
Thanks, Aline. Okay, so we may assume that there will be now a turn in the tide. Hopefully, we are edging closer to some sort of resolution or cooling down the conflict. And actually, in this October wave that I just mentioned, we found the first time that households have now more weapons. They say the number of weapons they have now is more than they had before the invasion. So there seem to be kind of signs that weapons start to crawl back to households, and this kind of necessitates a relatively immediate response of control and the technical management of the firearm situation, which is going to be a small part of the much bigger problem of how to integrate back all the combatants and how to rebuild the society and mitigating all the social problems and risks related to crime and other anomic phenomena. But this firearm management will definitely be a significant issue, and it could affect development opportunities for a longer term. So this is clearly the key primary policy effort, but it's a very broad one. More closely, I think it is going to be a challenge to somehow reconcile the reality of an increased membership of firearms that have dubious legal status, trophy weapons, scavenged weapons that people will increasingly find when they are let back closer to the battle zones, and on the other hand, the clear expectation of the electorate to go back to that very restrictive regime of firearms, and that's a policy challenge that definitely needs addressing. And maybe, well, yeah, the information campaigns I already mentioned, that these are going to be crucial, that we need to teach about risks and how to handle firearms, because we must anticipate, even if we can control, it's better safe to be sorry. We must teach people how to handle and store firearms if they decide to have some at home.
Thank you very much, Gergely. Thank you. I will move on now to Taras.
Right, so lots can be said, but I'll say one thing, and that is that trophy weapons must be accounted for, controlled, and registered. And that does not just mean ramping up controls, right? So kind of ramping up the use of the stick, the punishing stick. It also means making it easier for troops to register, reducing the red tape to do with registration, and assuming these weapons as material, as assets on the balance sheet of various units. But it also means addressing the root causes of the resistance to registration, right? So one thing that I try to press on you is that there is a practical logic to capture of trophy weapons and to their non-registration, and that is that units are trying to solve various kinds of problems that they meet. And so without, for example, addressing the issues with sufficiency and stability of military supplies to frontline units, it's going to be more difficult to address the issue of registering and incentivizing the registration of trophy weapons. And so likewise, without if you don't reduce the underlying problem, which is that units are trying to fend off for themselves and thereby resort to informal barter with neighboring units in critical resources, which can be fuel on one occasion, right? Or it can be a trophy weapon. If you don't reduce incentives for that, meaning that if you don't ensure the units are well supplied, well provisioned, well paid, it's going to be more difficult to incentivize and to register trophy weapons, right? So you need to think a little bit out of the box in what is the sort of the ecosystem of practices within which the non-registration capture exist. And for that, I think it will be good to set up an expert, multi-stakeholder expert group that would try to look into the actual practices of capture, use, and proliferation of these weapons.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Taras. And then last but not least, Matt.
Yes, thanks very much. So I would say, so there's no panacea. There's no center of gravity for this problem. It requires a defense in depth that involves Ukrainian authorities at every level, but also neighboring authorities and authorities throughout regions where proliferation may be a concern at some point. But I will say that if I had to prioritize one thing, it would be identifying, securing, and disposing of weapons that are currently outside of government control. So there's a lot of pre-positioned and abandoned caches of weapons. Some of them are quite large, and they contain very formidable weapons. That appears to be one of the primary sources of illicit weapons for a lot of the arms traffickers. And so those need to be identified, and they need to be eliminated as a potential source. Similarly, for the small amounts of weapons that are proliferated throughout Ukraine, they already have a system for reporting them. That system, we need to make sure that they have enough resources, and we need to surge resources for the addressing both sources of weapons, both sources of loose weapons in a serious way. Preferably now, but definitely when the conflict starts to wind down. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Matt. So thank you all for your presentation. We will now move to the next segment of this webinar. And for this, we will hear from Victoria Voronina, Lieutenant Colonel Olga Merdova, and Evgen Chernikov. So Victoria is actually the Executive Director of the Center for Security Studies. She's also the former Deputy Minister for Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine and has extensive experience in public administration and security policies. So she managed a wide range of initiatives on small arms and light weapon control, DDR, social cohesion, resilience, and hybrid threat. But most important of all, she has been the driving force behind this project. For all of our activities that we conducted in Ukraine, she has been the lead to develop the Ukrainian networking group, which is a network of over 20 experts with background in law, ballistic journalism, sociology, police, and so forth, to equip them with new skills related to arms trafficking and offer also learning exchanges to better support the civil society to counter this threat in the future. We will also have the pleasure to have Olga Merdova, who has a PhD in legal science, currently serving as the Deputy Director of Educational and Scientific Research Activities at the Institute of Donetsk State University of Internal Affairs. She has 25 years also of service experience in law enforcement agencies, including service in the National Police, and she is an active member of Ukrainian networking group. And Evgen Chernikov is a representative of the European Union Advisory Mission in Ukraine, who is responsible for small arms and light weapon control. Evgen is also a former Ukrainian prosecutor with experience in prosecution and organized crime, also has a PhD in criminal law, and has been actively involved in the process of firearms control issue, in particular in harmonizing national legislation with the EU, cooperating with Parliament also in legal drafting. So I think we have an excellent panel to discuss all of these issues this afternoon. So Victoria will start this session by providing a presentation on the main finding of her chapter, as she is the author of the 4th chapter on arms control measures and legislation. And then she will moderate this session with Evgen and Olga. The discussion would be in Ukrainian, so please ensure that you have clicked on the right button for translation, for interpretation at the bottom of your screen. There is a globe icon. Victoria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aline, for this introduction and for all your good words. Actually, I am happy to be here now, and I'm also happy to see within the list of attendees a lot of members of our networking group we created in 2023, and we worked together for these 2.5 years with discussions, microgrant project, with implementation of a lot of our ideas throughout Ukraine in different regions, and we hope we continue our fruitful cooperation in next phases. So I would like to start my presentation with policy overview. Based here in Ukraine, we heard a lot about the situation with legislation, with some lags, with some gaps. We had a lot of consultation with Ukrainian experts, with lawyers. We used materials that conducted within our microgrant research and put it in a chapter that Aline already mentioned about measures to prevent diversion and misuse of civilian-held firearms. Наступний слайд, будь ласка. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So I would like to start with the situation that very familiar for all Ukrainians, that we don't have still the law of civilian armed possession or civilian weapons, right on civilians to possess weapons. And since Ukrainian independence, we have no proper law on this issue. And the most tricky situation is that according to Ukrainian constitution, all our rights should be established by law, but not by laws like regulations. But in fact, in Ukraine, since 1998, we have the regulation order of the Ministry of Interior. A lot of people know it already. It's order number 622 that regulate all issues of armed possession, transportation, storages, etc. But unfortunately, no law. In different years, our parliament made some attempts to adopt the appropriate legislation, but still the process is not very successful. As for now, we have draft law, the current draft law number 5708, but it's still not very consistent with international standards, with EU directive, with UN protocol. Actually, this law passed the first reading, and after the first reading in the Verkhovna Rada, the draft was the authors of the draft received more than 300 edits, and for the second hearing it was included in our parliament, but still was not in a session in a hall of during the hearing. Also, we don't have good legislation about full spectrum of weapons that connected to the wartime. We don't have this legal clarity on trophy and award weapons or weapons held by volunteer formation of territorial communities. It doesn't mean that we have nothing. We have some regulations, we have some bylaws, but it's separated in different legislative acts, and sometimes it's very difficult to see these matches or to see the changes or follow the regulation to have a clear picture and to follow all the regulation by Ukrainian lawyers or subjects who included in this process. Next slide, please. Also, in our project and in our report, we highlight the approach that arms policy should be not only the issue of criminal or administrative law issue, especially after the war, especially taking into account the experience of different countries that had the war on their territories. The issue of demobilization, the issue of disarmament, the issue of reintegration of veterans, the issue of education and gun culture. It's much broader range of issues that only criminal or administrative procedures. That's why we highlighted this approach and made some efforts to have the discussion more broader about it in Ukraine and include the specialists in security, public health, veteran reintegration, education, culture, media in this topic, and persuade that this issue should be visible in broader context, not only in criminal or administrative law procedures. Next slide, please. Also, Ukraine had already made some good efforts in arms control, and it includes the Coordination Center for Combating Illicit Arms Trafficking that was established in February 2025, and it headed by the Minister of Internal Affairs. It had very good composition of representatives from security, customs, law enforcement, parliament, etc. And the goal of this center is to coordinate stakeholders, but at the same time, we unfortunately should admit that this organ, this authority is an advisory temporary institution, not even institution, the advisory temporary body of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, and it has lack of formal structure and no institutional entering, actually no executive power. It can develop proposals, but it cannot implement such proposals. So all decisions or all recommendations made by this coordination center should still come back to the authority that initiated it or under mandate of it is this particular issue, and passed through this authority, through the Cabinet of Ministers, through the Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers again and again to be adopted by the government of Ukraine. And actually the coordination remains ad hoc despite of the good example of establishing contact point actually within this coordination center on the basis of police, but still a bit lack of information of their activity is public. It's understandable that it could be sensitive information for Ukraine, but at the same time it could be double subordination of different for different professionals working in this area, for example for police officers or for border protection officers and others. Next slide, please. We also highlighted the issue of the numbers of illegal arms trafficking, illegal weapons, and we know that officially stated by the leadership of Ministry of Interior and leadership of National Police that we have in illegal circulation from 2 to 5 million weapons illegal. But at the same time, take into account our, Ukrainian initiative on declaration that look amazing to declare weapons by civilians even during wartime. That's already started. The declaration campaign shows the result like 13,000 items were declared since November until September 2025. So to compare these two figures, it's very crucial to understand the baseline line and the efficiency of the efforts taken by Ukrainian law enforcement agencies to reach such numbers. Also, we have some lacks, and expert admitted that Ukrainian unified register of weapons that existed since 2023 and contain information about legally possessed firearms or other types of weapons. It's very good for accountability and checks, but some experts admit that this register should be synchronized with other database and other registers. And this register exclude information about military trophy or scavenged arms and have limited scope. So it could be the issue for discussion during wartime or after wartime, but a lot of experts admit that it should be synchronized with other database in Ukraine. Next slide, please. And I would like to finish my presentation and overview with the issue I already said at the beginning. That's about the arms policy or weapons policy that should be seen as broader as a responsibility not only of law enforcement agencies but the broader actors and also the part of community police. And in this case, civil society organization and local self-government bodies should be included in this process broadly, like they were already included in mine action or were previously included in countering drugs trafficking or working with youth or any other prevention measures that can be under their responsibility, taking into account their level of trust among society, taking into account the previous experience of states that went through the conflict, like in Balkans or other states. And also civil society organizations should be included in this process more broadly as actors that can support and be partner for other authorities in Ukraine. So I will stop now here, and as Aline already mentioned, we have this mixed format of presentation and discussion today, and I would like to invite the two colleagues who work with us as a part of UNG network and also as advisory committee, Olga Merdova and Yevgen Chernikov, and I will switch in Ukrainian language now to have this discussion with them. Я би хотіла одразу задати своє перше питання
I would like to
з
start by
того,
asking the first
що
question
у нас питання відсутності закону про зброю, про право
about the
володіння
lack
зброєю,
of
вона
law
регулярно
on
обговорюється
weapons
українськими
or
експертами,
the
українськими
legalization of
законодавцями,
the
правоохоронними органами і так
ownership
далі.
of
Але
weapons,
на
something that is
сьогоднішній
being
день важливо
discussed by the
не
public
лише мати
and the
закон,
police
а
and law
мати
enforcement
закон, який
agencies for
відповідає
a very long
директивам,
time now, but
регуляторним
this
актам
law should
Євросоюзу.
also
І
be in full
моє
compliance with
питання
regulatory acts
заключається в
of the
тому,
European Union. And my
що
question is
як ви
this.
бачите, як представник
As a
місії
representative
ЄС в Україні,
of
як
the
би могло б гармонізувати це законодавство з нормами ЄС, як ви бачите ці гармонізації, і, можливо,
mission
де ще
in
це було
Ukraine,
враховано
what
в
needs
тому
to be done to
законопроекті, який так багато
harmonize
зараз говорять
all
про нього.
that and whether it could be handled by the draft law that everybody talks about. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Victoria, for the sound question. Harmonization with the laws of the EU at the level of the implementation of the national legislation reflects on the directive of the EU of 2021, number 555, which regulates the controls over purchasing and owning weapons. We believe that the first step in implementing this directive will be passing in the second reading the draft law 5708 that you have mentioned, the provisions of which by and large comply with the requirements of the directive. Of course, it requires further updating. We still prepare it for the second reading, but we work closely with our partners from the Deputy Corps with co-authors of this draft law and with European Commission that is also instrumentally involved. I have analyzed how this draft law complies with EU laws, and we believe that by passing this law, most of the harmonization outstanding questions would be resolved. There is no unity among the MPs. We know about this. There is a separate opinion of the Ministry of Internal Affairs about the circulation of short barrel firearms, but without about giving the permission for people to own such weapons, looking at the provisions of the law that are ready for the second reading. Like I said, most of them comply with other requirements of the EU directives, but not only them have to be reflected in the national laws and regulations. Also, the law enforcement officers expect that the criminalization of the use of separate components would also be introduced, because right now owning a barrel or a trigger would not be criminalized. And again, there is another initiative to differentiate the punishment for illicit ownership, sales, manufacturing, or processing of weapons. Of course, there is huge threats to the civilians because of that. So it's important for the parliament to start finally treating this particular topic, which will then be reflected on the follow-up case law. My next question is about the performance of the coordination center, working with similar centers in the EU or in candidate countries. The consultative mission of EU, what do you believe should be the priorities for the performance of these coordination centers, and can you suggest what could be improved and streamlined? Well, as for this coordination center, it took us a while to run advocacy campaigns, sharing the information about similar institutions in Romania, Spain, and Portugal. So we presented their cases to the representatives of the law enforcement agencies, their headquarters. We even arranged study tours so that they will have first-hand experience of observing how they operate. So the coordination center, as a result, was established more than a year now, but the fact that it's being established is not enough. So far, the coordination center only conducted one session in February 2025. And since then, I have not heard about any other sessions conducted. Also, the contact point could be better streamlined, because their operators deliver a huge workload 24/7. Andrei Pluzhnikov, I'd like to thank you for all your endeavors and efforts, and the fact that this contact point doesn't have the status of the structural unit within the National Police of Ukraine, and thus doesn't have its staffing numbers, the registered number of the employees, well, it doesn't make its work any better. As the report mentions, if we formalize its status and staffing numbers, it would help us to contribute to more effective involvement of partners and the improvement on the performance of these contact points as well. If you have any questions, I will gladly entertain them. Thanks a lot, Yevhen. And now I would like to switch to Olha with my questions. Can you tell me, please, Olha? No, I would like to start by stating that being the member of the team of the Donetsk Internal Affairs Academy, you did your own survey about the trafficking in weapons, as well as diversion and misuse, and you have interviewed more than 16,000 police officers, and the information you have collected covered all the regions of Ukraine, and is probably one of the most in-depth currently available in Ukraine. So my question to you is this: what do the police officers think about whether the existing legislation on how to control weapons is enough or not? And what do they think about the decisions of our parliament and government in the time of war, like those campaigns on declaring weapons or other initiatives. Probably they have some other thoughts or alternatives to those initiatives of the government. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Victoria, for your questions. Well, the survey that we conducted, first of all, was anonymous, and thus the answers of the respondents really demonstrated their sincere perception of the topic, because when you know that you stay anonymous, you can share some critical insights. Also, we received lots of evidence in support of some of the initiatives. So, the respondents divided 50-50, approximately half believe that the current weapons laws and regulations are enough and sufficient, but the other half believes that it still requires some improvements. But all of the police officers are in favor of finally legislatively regulating the circulation of weapons in Ukraine at the level of the law, passing finally the law. How you would call this law? The law on weapons, the law on the circulation of weapons, different terms were suggested, but all the officers were in favor of finally passing the weapons law. As for the assessment of the existing secondary laws, well, what Yevhen stated about introducing changes to the criminal code of Ukraine, and by the way, our respondents believe that namely 51% of the respondents stated that what they need is the changes to be introduced into the criminal code of Ukraine. In particular, changing the existing provision of Article 236 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, and we heard different positions here, like this norm doesn't require any alterations or adjustments, all the way to the other suggestions, like let's add some qualification traits, or let's strengthen and make the sanctions more rigid. And other respondents stated that we'll need to grade the liabilities. Well, 83% of the respondents unequivocally support the need to introduce criminal responsibility for illicit ownership, sales, or manufacturing of the components of firearms. And by the way, in your presentation, you mentioned about the changes in the law of Ukraine on introducing the procedure on declaration of arms, of weapons. So during our survey, that law was still a draft under review. So when we were generalizing the results of the survey already conducted, the law was already passed and adopted. So some of the aspects that the police officers mentioned in our interviews, namely what they suggested to improve bypassing this draft law, were eventually passed in the wording of the law, but still some of the provisions remained unregulated, even though the practitioners suggested that they need to be tackled and improved. Thank you, Olha. Tell me more, please, about the approach on switching from only criminal and administrative justice to more to security policy perception. And we also discussed that prevention, prophylactics, and cooperation between various law enforcement agencies and the involvement of the residents of the communities is important. So, in light of this approach, what would you recommend how at the grassroots level to ensure that police officers, NGOs, and residents cooperate?
Well, thank you for your question. It's really an important one. As you were asking this question, it came up to my mind. I recall the policies that can be considered successful when in the end of the year 2015, beginning 2016, the matter of domestic violence was intensely touched upon. And back then, there was no tight cooperation between civil organizations, law enforcement, local authorities. But gradually, those initiatives that were implemented, they found support among the population. They yielded their fruits, and such practices may be useful also when it comes to prevention of illegal proliferation of weapons. First of all, we need to set up multidisciplinary teams that would include law enforcement officers, representatives of central authorities, and representatives of civil society. Definitely, when we were surveying the police officers, their priority was the awareness campaigns, because currently we understand that Ukraine is still under the legal regime of martial law, and many may think that it's untimely to discuss such a topic. However, the things don't happen momentarily, both for the society and for the law enforcement. It's necessary to have some time to make some managerial decisions, to develop relevant measures to be taken in the regions. That's why we need to start discussing it now already, and we need to expand the information space, so to say. For example, currently in the information space, in the media space, we're only seeing reports of these or those negative events or incidents taking place in our society. There was explosion there, shooting over here, there was a seizure. Obviously, there are reports of seizure of weapons, but when it comes to popularization of information that would stimulate the citizens to turn the weapons in, when it comes to some awareness-raising campaigns, covering safe handling, for example, I think that such campaigns are not sufficient, and this is the vector where we should apply our force, so to say. Thank you. So now I would like to give the floor to Aline. Thank you very much for your
for your contributions. I think it was very helpful. So we'll move on now to the Q&A. We have a little bit of time left, and there has been a bit of interest actually from participants to hear more about trophy weapons and what's happening on the front. So I will turn to you, Taras, to answer this question. The question is the following: how clear-cut is the distinction between soldier or civilian in the context of Ukraine? So how many unregistered weapons might end up in civilian hands? And I mean, you already touched upon this in your presentation, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more on the practical reasons that the troops are keeping sometimes unregistered trophies, I think it may be helpful for many.
Thank you, Aline, and thank you to the person asking the question. I mean, I want to first begin by reiterating the distinction between a trophy weapon as we take it from the Ukrainian regulations and legislation, and found weapons, right? So when we're talking about trophy weapons, we're talking about weapons found by the military on the battlefield. And that is just one of the potential sources, the caches of unregistered trophy weapons, one of the potential sources of the weapons that might find their way to the hands of civilians, right? I think Matt's presentation and his part of the report make it abundantly clear that prepositioned or abandoned Russian caches of weapons in areas from which Russian troops retreated are a potentially more dangerous and a plentiful source of these weapons. And that is a separate issue from the issue of the ways in which trophy weapons might find their ways from the front line to the rear, to the hands of, and then from the hands of military, ex-military personnel into the hands of the civilians, right? So there's actually, the question contains or kind of points to a much more complex picture of the circulation and diversion of weapons and stocks. I'll just say that when it comes to trophies that find their way from the front line elsewhere, in the evidence that we've collected, it is mostly very small scale, which is partly the sort of the social desirability bias in the interviewing, but still a very sort of small scale issue of someone traveling from the front line home and forgetting a grenade in the gloves department of the car, and that grenade turning out to be an unregistered trophy, for example, right? There's much less, and this kind of dovetails with a more general, broader proliferation of grenades and ammunition than the actual small arms. So this is something that I think checkpoints and checks at postal services close to the front line can deal with effectively. But this is as best as I can answer from my point of view. And the thing to add there, and kind of touching upon the other thing that Aline has asked, is that actually talking to non-combatants, but civilians who are involved in supporting military operations, such as military volontaires, as you would call them in Ukraine, right? So the military activists, some of them receive trophies and ammunition as gifts, for a symbolic gift for the support of operation. We've got several interviews discussing that in our work. This is not something that we look into in particular length in the report, but this is in line with the broader the patterns of limited frontline circulation of trophies that we discuss. And again, this is something that can be dealt with through checkpoint checks and basically continue that work of inspection and checking and solicitation of voluntary give-ups of weapons that the Ukrainian police and the state are already doing.
Excellent, Taras. Thank you very much for responding to this question and for the audience for submitting. It seems that there is another area of interest among the audience would be about the type of weapons that are circulating in Ukraine and that would pose the greatest threat. So the question was, which of the illicit weapons circulating in Ukraine right now pose the greatest threat and why? And maybe I would like to turn to Matt, who has been analyzing hundreds of arms seizures documents to start answering this question, and then to all other panelists who, of course, are welcome to complete the answer. Please, Matt, if you can say a few words.
Sure. So this is a trick question because there is no single most problematic weapon. The weapons are problematic in different contexts. The ones that are most problematic vary from context to context. So on a day-to-day basis, it's some more mundane weapons, it's more garden variety weapons, it's the unregistered firearms, it's the grenades, etc. From an international terrorism perspective, it is the latest generation man-portable air defense systems. So the shorter answer is there isn't one. We need to control all of them, which I realize is much more difficult to do than to simply say, but we need to recognize that all arms and ammunition pose a threat and an equally problematic threat at different levels and in different contexts.
Thank you very much. Would another panelist like to add anything? No? Okay, so maybe I will move on to one last questions, which can maybe many of you can answer to this. What countermeasures are critical for preventing international traffickings of arms and ammunition in Ukraine? Again, it's many answers, but you can focus on the research that you have conducted. Even Olga, you're also, of course, free to jump in on this one. Maybe Matt, can I ask you? I know you have
Sure.
worked a bit on this, and we've had a few
Yeah,
exchanges on this.
Of course. So I would say, again, it's the idea of a defense in depth. You need very robust border controls, both on the Ukrainian side and on the side of their neighbors. You need, and again, I just want to underscore the absolute importance of securing those loose weapons, because those loose weapons are the low-hanging fruit for arms traffickers and arms traffickers, including those that may have designs on sending weapons outside of the country. So strong border controls, strong stockpile security, strong monitoring of various modes of transport and modes of shipping, including the Postal Service, as Taras mentioned, and then close cooperation and intelligence sharing with between Ukrainian authorities and their colleagues abroad, because if there is a shipment of weapons that is seized in Europe, it will be absolutely critical that the European authorities who suspect that it came from Ukraine, get a prompt and very accurate answer as to where it came from, and that there's close cooperation in tracking the chain of custody for the weapons that are interdicted. So that's, I mean, there are more countermeasures that I go into, but I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Matt. So we are arriving at the end of our session. So I would actually like to give the floor to Nicolas Florquin, who is the Small Arms Survey's head of data and analytics, senior researcher with a lot of experience in innovative mixed method analysis, and most importantly has been providing a lot of strategic guidance throughout this project. So I think he will have the final words for this session. Please, Nicolas.
Thank you so much, Aline, and thank you to all our speakers and discussants today. I thought it was a very rich discussion. And thanks, of course, to all our participants who stayed with us until the end. And I'll be very short because I know we already passed the 90 minutes. But I think one of the key messages and takeaways from this long research and venture culminating in this presentation today is that there's already a lot of work being done, a lot of awareness of the challenges posed by arms proliferation in Ukraine, and especially among Ukrainian stakeholders. We're seeing this through, for example, the increase in seizures. I mean, this really is a testimony that Ukrainian law enforcement is taking this seriously, and the doubling of seizures, of course, reflects an increase in the scale of the issue, but also the authorities' attention to the issue and continued prioritization of this issue in the midst of an active war. We've also seen this through the number of special measures that were mentioned that were taken by the government since 2022, the establishment of the coordination center, the weapons register, and other types of initiatives that show that arms control can also happen during high intensity conflict. And I think we really need to laud Ukrainian authorities for this. I would also add, and I know we have a number of regional partners here and law enforcement listening, and to also recognize the work they're doing in cooperation with Ukrainian authorities to facilitate information exchange. I think someone also asked in the chat about lost weapons in Ukraine, and so we also know that there's a lot of information exchange on lost weapons with European entities to allow for the tracing if they ever show up in Europe. So we really need to recognize that there is already a lot going on, but that obviously the challenges are significant moving forward, both if the conflict continues or in a possible transition kind of scenario. And I would just highlight a few. I mean, I guess we hear a lot in general about the need to strengthen the security of Ukrainian stockpiles, which is a legitimate concern, especially for the Western powers that provide weapons to Ukraine. But I think the research shows that that's not the only priority. We saw in the work on seizures that actually abandoned caches near the front line or in liberated territories are possibly the main source at the moment of illicit weapons. So this clearly needs to be also looked at very seriously, and resources need to be allocated to interdicting trafficking from this kind of source. There's also the problem of that might arise if and when combatants return home, and they can bring back their personal weapons. They can bring back potentially trophy weapons. I don't think we talked about scavenge weapons, which are the weapons found by civilians, not by combatants. And so these are all issues also that need to be anticipated if the dynamics of the war change. And finally, I would also want to also project ourselves into some of the mental health issues, some of which are already happening now, but that might also escalate in a transition phase as people who faced active conflict and might come back and have access to weapons, and the sort of risks that this poses for society. So I think there's a lot of specific issues that Ukrainian authorities and their partners need to look at. So I think we also saw through this cooperation and partnership with the Center of Security Studies, but also with a range of other Ukrainian partners we worked with during this research and work, that there is the capacity to look at these issues and to project ourselves into also what the challenges. The upcoming challenges might be and what potential solutions they are. So it's really not the last, the end of our work in Ukraine. I think we all really look forward to continuing these discussions and unpacking some of these issues further in the next years with our partners and the government. Before I close the meeting, I would just want to say a last round of thank yous, because it was a long journey to get here. And of course, I want to thank our partners at the Center for Security Studies, and especially Victoria for her continued support and sometimes some very difficult conditions in Ukraine. So thank you so much to you and your team for all the support throughout these years. The German Federal Foreign Office for the support and trust, Ukrainian authorities and other partners for the information sharing and cooperation. But also my colleagues at the Small Arms Survey. Aline, thank you for your excellent coordination of this project and leading to this report. And also special thanks to our publications team led by Olivier de Nonville for getting this report out on time for this event in both Ukrainian and English, which was no small feat. It's always the end of the year where everything happens, and we managed to do everything on time and at a very high level of standard. So to finally conclude, I think we really look forward to building upon this work, to continue to support Ukraine and its partners in dealing and anticipating the wartime arms proliferation that we've documented and its impact on human, regional, and national security. So thank you to all the participants, and I think the meeting can close now with just a little bit of delay. And we look forward to remaining in touch. Thank you very much.